That's the first photograph of Stalin. Center, middle. He's about 10, 12 years old. That's, you see the attitude? Yeah. That's Stalin in the seminary, second from the left on the top, beardless. That's the seminary building, neoclassical. That's where Stalin studied to be a priest. That's the guy who taught Stalin Marxism, Lotto Ketsavelli, fellow Georgian. He died young. That's Stalin's only job, the observatory. He was a weatherman. He came out, took the weather, and went back in. That's Stalin's prison cell, his first major prison cell. Unfortunately, they let him out. But what would have happened had Stalin died, or had there been no Stalin? So, the regime, as it was in the 1920s, was a single-party dictatorship. Industry was owned by the state, and in the countryside, where the vast majority of people lived, and where the wealth was, the size of the harvest was the main factor in GDP, was a private capitalist system, more or less. Now, Stalin built a personal dictatorship within the dictatorship. This was an act of unbelievable skill that the book devotes a great deal of attention to. Now, Stalin was no genius. He made many mistakes. He had no understanding of fascism, for example, which was a big thing to get wrong. So we don't want to make him out to be better than he was. He was very blinkered. But when it came to building a building a personal dictatorship inside the communist dictatorship, he was very good at that. And that's what he did. So he had the authority to make decisions that others couldn't participate in even, let alone make. And so he was controlling the situation with his personal dictatorship, but he didn't have control over the country. That's very important.
Throughout the 20s.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And so you can imagine without him, who's talented enough to keep the dictatorship together? And you look
Do you see any potential
you look at the
candidates
inside of the Bolshevik regime, and you don't see such talented
yeah.
people at the top. Now, of course, some people come out of nowhere, right? All of a sudden, they are, I don't know, in the Senate for a day or two, and then they're president, right? That happens. So it could be that somebody else could have come up from somewhere in the regime that we underestimate now because they didn't have that opportunity. But if you look at the actual goings-on in the regime at the time, you'd be pessimistic about a figure with that skill level on the inside of the regime. Moreover, the regime couldn't manage the quasi-market. It kept ruining its own new economic policy, such that the peasants didn't deliver the grain anymore. And
that was the crisis of when? 28?
Already 26, 27,
yeah,
28, it wasn't working anymore.
And they lost nerves. They tried violent
The communist regime in a capitalist world, a capitalist-dominated world, and with a capitalist-like countryside, was a minoritarian regime, and it was in trouble. And it looks to me like, of course, we'll never know, but it looks to me like the regime would have collapsed. It looks to me like they would have softened the one-party dictatorship.
They would have to. They would be forced.
They would not have been able to hold it together. And we would have ended up with either a new crisis that spawned violence and another kind, maybe a military dictatorship, a right-wing dictatorship, or a different version of the left. Or we would have had themselves conceding and evolving towards a recognition that the capitalist-like countryside was here to stay, and we would have a mixed economy, and therefore we would have a mixed polity also.